Senate Republicans passed their version of the tax cut bill, which is actually really a tax hike bill. Yes, it would give tons of money to the rich and to corporations, but it would increase taxes in the long run for more than half of all Americans, as I told you last week. It would increase taxes in the long run for millions of seniors, as I told you last week. Middle-class families earning under $75,000 a year would see tax increases over the long term. Graduate students would get absolutely crushed, and this would increase the debt hugely. But we have Republicans voting in favor of it. And the version of the bill that senators voted on was released just a few hours before it was voted on. As usual, not enough time to actually read it before voting. Completely pathetic. And the entire thing has not yet become the law. Some people have emailed me saying now that this bill is the law. House Republicans voted to pass one version. Senate Republicans voted to pass a different version. And now, and maybe as early as this week, the conference committee will start. And what they will try to do is merge the two bills into one, and ideally into one version that both the House and Senate can agree on. But something really weird happened. This is bizarre. After the Senate passed a version of the bill, Trump said at some fundraisers over the weekend that he would consider a higher corporate tax rate than the one that was passed in the Senate bill, which is weird. I'm not saying I disagree with that, but Trump has been talking about lowering the corporate tax rate, which would not be good for hiring anyway, by the way. CEOs of big corporations have said, no, we're not going to hire more if you lower our tax rate. Trump has been campaigning on lowering that, and now he's saying he might actually want a higher corporate tax rate than the one that was passed by Republicans in the Senate. I don't even want to concern myself with that. That's just Trump being Trump. This is not a good bill for most people. That is what I'm concerned with, period. If voters understood things, then we would all be able to sit back and say, don't worry. If Republicans get this thing passed, they'll get crushed in November in the midterms and in 2020 as well. But the problem is that too many people are just clueless about the details of the bill. They'll hear Trump promised a tax bill and Republicans delivered a tax bill. They did it with no regard for what it is, even though this bill, if it passes, if it becomes the law, would be the exact opposite of the populist paradise that Donald Trump ran on. There's this idea that is out there as well for all of you who believe that every senator here is ultimately going to vote to pass the conference version. I mentioned this last week. There's this idea that there are some more moderate Senate Republicans. Lisa Murkowski from Alaska is one of the ones whose name is being thrown about, who voted for the Senate version for now in order to be able to say, hey, I was in favor of tax reform, but will ultimately vote against the conference version so that they can also say, hey, you know what? I support tax reform, but in the end, what the House and Senate committees agreed upon would not have been good. That's interesting political posturing and theater that is sort of an aside to what's going on. And I'm curious whether we'll see that.
And if she goes along with that, then you just need one more Senate Republican, right? Maybe Susan Collins,
who would fail
Jeff
it.
Flake.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not, I mean, I don't know if we could say it's likely or unlikely, but there are moderately reasonable Republicans in the Senate who I could see not going along with whatever totally abortive conference version comes out of that. I do hope that whether this passes or not, Democrats will do everything that they can do to crush Republicans with this in the midterms. Make it clear that Republicans, if they pass this bill, are taking hundreds of billions of dollars away from families and giving it to the rich and to corporations, period. And the only path forward, the only solution is to vote them out. And that applies to a lot of issues. We talked about net neutrality last week with attorney Andrew Torres, and we basically have to realize we can't stop the repeal of net neutrality. We're beyond signing petitions. We're beyond calling members of Congress, although I still encourage you to do it. Roy Moore campaign, you just got to vote, right? You've got to vote for the other guy. These tax cut proposals, which are actually tax hikes for more than half of Americans in the long run, at a certain point, the calls and the petitions aren't going to do it. You've got to vote these people out.
Yeah, and I mean, who's calling for any of this? No one wants net neutrality to be repealed.
Yeah.
I mean, this tax bill, usually you pass tax reform when, you know, the economy is in shambles, right? You think back to Reagan, and you'd think it would maybe stimulate the economy, or
if you believe in those economics, right?
Right. Yeah, and George
can,
W. Bush, there was a surplus, and maybe
yes,
you could figure you can put that money back to the people's hands, right? There's no reason for this. They're just getting away with murder.
It's funny because Trump claims that the economy is just doing so incredibly well. Well, if the economy is doing so well and you've not yet changed anything about how the economy works, and taxes are a big thing, The health insurance is a big thing. Right now, taxes and health insurance, which are two of the major economic components in the American economy, they're what President Obama left you. So if indeed the economy is doing so well with the exact parameters that President Obama left you, why would you be trying to make such major changes to some of the fundamental aspects of the economy? It's the vile, bottom feeding stuff. And speaking of which, Orrin Hatch, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, an example of this, the morally corrupt deviance from common decency. Orrin Hatch, during the Senate debate about this bill, the topic of CHIP came up, Children's Health Insurance Plan. That costs about $14 billion a year. And during the Senate debate about this tax cut bill, Orrin Hatch said, we're going to do CHIP. There's no question about it in my mind, and it's got to be done the right way. But the reason CHIP's having trouble is because we don't have money anymore. And to just add more and more spending and more spending, and you can look at the rest of the bill for the more and more spending, I have a rough time wanting to spend billions and billions and trillions of dollars to help people who won't help themselves, won't lift a finger, and expect the federal government to do everything. How do we not have $14 billion for children's health insurance, but we can add $1 trillion to the debt to give tax cuts to the rich so they can bank more cash? And what is Orrin Hatch talking about? People who won't help themselves? We're talking about children here, kids. What is it that the kids aren't doing to help themselves? They don't have full-time jobs? What on earth is he talking about? This is the mindset that actually explains the bill. The poor, kids, minorities, whoever, these are people who just want handouts, while big corporations and rich people who have earned everything that they have and more need to have their taxes cut. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Today's program, I am thrilled to say, is made possible in part by Movement watches. I am wearing one of my Movement watches today. I despise holiday shopping because of the lines and the driving and the parking lots and the entire thing. But I also am not thrilled with the aspect of giving and or receiving gifts that I don't really like, or that the person isn't going to really like that I'm giving the gift to. And a really great gift idea is a Movement watch, and it can eliminate the gift-giving anxiety. And you don't even have to get away from your computer, mobile phone, or tablet to do it. And the gifts start at just $95. Watches that if you went to a department store, you would see and you would imagine that's got to be a $400 or $500 watch. These start at $95 because Movement circumvents the retail markup and the middleman by selling directly to you online, and you don't have to stand in crazy holiday buying lines. I love the Movement watch. I've said it before. I have 2 different ones that I will wear on different occasions. People see it, people like it. They say, hey, where did you get that? And I tell them where I got it. And the Movement business model is also an interesting one to me because they started in a lot of ways similarly to how the David Pakman Show started, really crowdfunding and using that to build and grow a platform. And they've now sold something like 1 million watches in 160 different countries. You can get 15% off plus free shipping and free returns if you go to mvmt.com/Pakman. The watches have great minimalist, clean designs, and they make really great gifts. Save 15% free shipping, free returns at mvmt.com/PAKMAN.